Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. My guest today is Diego Arria. He was Venezuela's permanent representative to the United Nations back in the early 1990s, and he's a staunch opponent of the regime of Nicolas Maduro and his predecessor Hugo Chavez, against whom he brought charges of crimes against humanity before the International Criminal Court. He joins us via satellite from New York. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so very much for having me.
Mr. Arria, obviously the situation is extremely tense in Venezuela. In addition to all the political tensions, the economic hardship, we've seen a major power outage for the past few days. The regime of Nicolas Maduro has accused the self-proclaimed president, Juan Guaido, of being the instigator of this and has threatened to bring charges against him. My question is not so much on the merits of those accusations, but do you fear that the regime is now about to go after Juan Guaido?
Well, Maduro also accused the United States of sending, he said, invisible magnetic rays that destroy the electrical power system. Well, the charges they're absolutely absurd. This is an illegitimate government, that is a regime passing all kinds of judgments and sentences over the legitimate president of Venezuela, Guaido, that no one is going to implement. As a matter of fact, Guaido continues to be free. So it is actually a proof that there is no government in Venezuela that can actually exercise that.
Do you think that the Maduro regime has its self-imposed red line, which is the arrest of Juan Guaido? I mean, there are already some investigations against him, but we saw that he was able to leave the country and come back a few days ago. So do you think the regime knows that it can't do this?
Well, and he came through the main international airport of Caracas. Yes, I think that the regime has accepted the red line that in a way has been imposed to him by the international community. He knows well that trespassing that red line may be the last blow that will bring down his regime.
Obviously, there have been attempts by Juan Guaido, the opposition, neighboring countries, obviously the United States, to try to force the military to take sides and to essentially drop Nicolas Maduro. There was this humanitarian aid convoy that was brought a few days ago. You were yourself there at the border with Colombia. However, it didn't happen. This was essentially a failed attempt.
You know, yes, you may be right in that conclusion, but at the same time, I spoke to some of the military members who that day went to our site, and they were telling me, you know, how terrible it was for them to actually take that decision when they had the families in Venezuela. And there is one issue, is when people say, what are the military going to do in Venezuela? I believe it's the wrong question. We have a military government, a military regime that controls not only the politics, controls the oil, controls the gas, controls the gasoline. So it's a government that has a civilian spokesman, which is Maduro, but it's a military regime.
Right, but obviously, as we've seen in other places, like Egypt, for instance, maybe we're witnessing it as we speak in Algeria, even a regime that is firmly in the hands of the military, including in the business area, when the military leadership decides that it doesn't want to back the regime, that's when the regime falls. And it hasn't happened despite all the pressure, including from Washington, including because of the economic situation. How do you explain that?
Well, you know, there have been 20 years of a long dictatorship, and there are so many interests. The hierarchy of the military is involved in so many wrong businesses like drug trafficking, etc., that makes them to stick to the position very strongly. But at the same time, the armed forces of Venezuela are around 150,000 people, and not all of them are corrupt like the main hierarchy. So it remains to be seen. I believe that we are in the process of forcing the military to take sides, or to take sides next to the legitimate president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido, or to continue supporting a narco-trafficking regime, which is the case of Maduro, that is now criticized and condemned by the most important members of the international community.
Right. Obviously, the strategy of Juan Guaido has been to try to lure the military, and including some senior military commanders, to his side. It hasn't worked until now. The U.S. Special Envoy to Venezuela, or at least the person who is handling the Venezuela file in Washington, Elliot Abrams, said just a day ago that the U.S. has been talking to Spain and other countries about offering asylum and working with regime officials. What do you know of the efforts by the U.S., their allies, to try to tell military, including maybe some of whom have been accused of narco-trafficking or other crimes, to essentially come to the other side?
Well, I remember the case of General Noriega. At that time, I was a minister in the government of Venezuela, and I know that Spain was actually offered as a place for Noriega to go, and Noriega refused, and he ended up in an American jail. I don't doubt that these conversations are going on. Actually, the foreign minister of Spain yesterday admitted that they would take a look at that. He was not very, he didn't give any more details. But there is an effort to try to find places for these people where can they be located. And also, Guaido has offered in the National Assembly a law of amnesty to actually pardon many of them who have not committed crimes against humanity to find refuge somewhere else.
Right. There's obviously the other options. The U.S. administration keeps on repeating that all options are on the table, and it has just announced that it will put out the remaining diplomats in Venezuela. Is a military operation still really on the table? We've seen many neighboring countries, including right-wing countries, saying they don't want this.
Well, you know, all the major powers always have the options on the table. They don't need to say that. They don't need to say that. When President Trump said it, it was, I believe, to convey a message of a strong dissuasion to the regime. But increasingly, there is less talk about a force. But the case of Venezuela today, without international support, we will not be able to rescue the country. Our freedom. When you see that we have, it's not a government that we have. You see criminal gangs that are already, many of them indicted by the U.S. Treasury for drug trafficking, etc., and other crimes. Without support, a population like ours, unarmed, will be very difficult, not to say impossible, to actually dislodge this criminal gang who are now in control of my country.
So are you personally in favor of a U.S.-led or U.S. military intervention in your country?
You know, I've been trying to say in the last few days, making the following statements. The humanitarian intervention have to be backed up by military assistance, not to invade a country, but to make sure that the humanitarian assistance gets to the places it should be and to the people they really want to help. The humanitarian assistance without military support is impossible. I saw that in Bosnia, and the only way to do it was actually with military support. That's not a military invasion to occupy a country. And people forget that Venezuela is already an occupied country, but by 40,000 Cubans, most of them agents of the Cuban regime. And nobody seems to care very much that we're an occupied country, but then they start concerning when they believe that some military support to enter humanitarian assistance to Venezuela will be the next step.
Right, but obviously there will never be such a consensus at the United Nations, an organization you know well, so it would have to be a unilateral decision by the U.S. You would still support that?
There is not one multilateral or international actually rescue of a country that has been done under the auspices of the Security Council. Security Council is not a very democratic institution. When you have two autocratic regimes like China and Russia who are in control of the council...
Strong supporters of Maduro, by the way.
absolutely strong. So for the moment, you realize it's not only not democratic. The Security Council is not a good guardian of humanitarian values today in the world. That has been proven many times in the last 20, 25 years.
Just a last question, we're running out of time. What do you see happening next? Do you fear violence, political violence, and really things getting worse in your country before they get better?
You know, it's such an unprecedented situation. When you think that in the last 4 days we didn't have electricity, that many people are dying because the dialysis machines are not working, or children in the hospitals, people drinking water from gray waters in the Rio Guaire, which is a contaminated river that crosses the city of Caracas. The desperation of the people increases when they start to believe that the international community will not support the efforts of President Guaidó to actually recapture our freedom. We're living very dangerous moments. You said at the beginning, tense moments. It is true, tense, but very tragic and very dangerous, not only for us, the Venezuelans, but for the region in general.
Diego Arria, thank you very much for being with us here on the interview. Stay tuned for more news on France 24.